Hello.
Hi everyone. Welcome to Azure User Group Sweden. And hi Håkan, how are
Hi,
you?
Hi, Jonah. I'm pretty fine. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. Yes, how's everyone today watching? I hope that you're having a great weekend, and thank you for spending your Saturday with us and learning about our session today, which is pretty interesting. It will be about like forgetting about the password, and yeah, it's interesting. I don't want to reveal so much. Yes, so before we start, I want to introduce ourselves. So let me start by introducing my community leader, Håkan Silvernagel. He's the manager for AI and big data at Miles, a Norwegian consulting company, and he is also the community leader of an AI school called AI 42, and also organizing events at Norwegian.net user group, and very active in the Oslo AI community, and a lot more that he does for the community.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jonah. And let me introduce to Jonah Andersson. So she's the founder of Azure User Group Sweden. And in addition, she is also an Azure MVP. And she is also she's a blogger, and she's a mentor and also a public speaker. And in her everyday lives, she works as a consultant for Forefront Consulting. And right now, she is working on her first book, which will be published by O'Reilly on Azure.
Yes. Thank you, Håkan. And I forgot to mention, Håkan is also a Microsoft MVP for AI. Yes. All right. Before we get started, let me just share to everyone about our code of conduct. So we would like to remind everyone about our community code of conduct, which means that we expect everyone to be nice and friendly, listen with purpose, and be thoughtful. Be respectful to others, seek to understand and not criticize, be curious and open to share your ideas, and be respectful and inclusive in your comments or questions during the sessions. And if you have questions or feedback about our code of conduct, feel free to contact me and Håkan, or read it more on our meetup and code of conduct page. Thank you.
Yeah, so then I think it's time for us to introduce our speaker here, Dwayne Natwick. Hello, Dwayne.
Hello, how are you doing?
Yeah, pretty good. How are you?
Great.
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me today.
Yes, it's a pleasure to have you here. So can I have a more formal introduction here? So Dwayne is a Microsoft MVP for Azure, and he's also an author, a trainer, and a product manager with over 30 years of experience in the IT industry. And he's certified in multiple both Azure and M365 roles, including the Azure Solution Architect Expert, Azure Administrator Associate, Azure Security Engineer Associate, and also Microsoft 365 Security Administrator Associate. And in addition to creating curriculum, training, and blog writing, Dwayne is also a Microsoft certified trainer and the regional lead.
Yes. We're so honored to have you, Dwayne. It seems like you have a lot of experience in different fields, especially about what you're going to talk about. Welcome.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much.
Yes. Yeah.
So do you want to say a couple of words here to our audience, what you will be covering today?
Yeah. So yeah, one of the areas that I am particularly passionate about is identity and access security and administration. With the public cloud and shared responsibility, our first level of defense is protecting our identities and who has access to our systems. So I plan. So what I'm going to do today in the next 45 minutes or so is talk about how we can what we can do and what we can put into place to bring our identity and access environment to the 21st century.
Yeah, sounds great.
Interesting. And I know that it's early for you, Dwayne. You're in the States right now. So we appreciate your time waking up early morning to be with us in the Swedish time. Thank you so much. And
No problem.
also, we wanted to inform everyone that we do the usual thing, that we will have our 15-minute after session fika. So if you want to join me, Håkan, and Dwayne, who are willing to stay with us after as well, feel free to join us. Håkan will share the Zoom link later at the end of our sessions.
Yes,
All right.
and also if you in the audience, if you have any questions, as always, just post your questions in the chat.
Yes, that's great. All right. So let me, without further ado, let's bring Dwayne to the stage with his presentation. Let's do that. Let me show. All right. The stage is yours, Dwayne.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jonah and Håkan and the Azure User Group Sweden for having me today. So yes, so the formal title of my presentation is Modern Authentication, Why Passwords Are No Longer a Priority. I should really more title this Should No Longer Be a Priority, and we're going to give some reasons why here in the next 45 minutes or so. So I'm not going to bore you with about the speaker. We already covered that in the introduction, but also on this slide are my social media links. Feel free to follow me or connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to answer any questions. I also do blog on captainhyperscaler.com. I also have a couple of books available that are around security in Azure. One of those being the Identity and Access Administrator, the SC300 exam prep. So if you're interested in security and particularly identity and access, feel free to look into those as well. So what are we going to talk about here today? I'm going to talk a little bit about the evolution of authentication, just to kind of set the groundwork. We're going to talk about a personal story of issues with identity and access management. And then we're going to go through some areas in which we can evolve into a more modern authentication approach with principles of zero trust, modern authentication, what that is, and then how we can protect user risk and with conditional access and different conditional access policies. And then finally, we're going to talk about our privileged access management and our administrator roles and how we can protect those with privileged identity management. Let's talk about authentication and the evolution of authentication. And really, to kind of set this talk and think about why I'm saying why passwords should not be important, we need to think about what are passwords and what happens with passwords, especially now that we are in this cloud environment. If you think about it, our usernames are very easy to guess. They're all over the internet ultimately because generally our usernames are our email addresses, and we share our email addresses with e-commerce sites. We have for our business. When we were doing personal live events, we carried business cards and we handed out business cards with our email address on it. We might as well, if you think about it from a digital standpoint, we are essentially handing people what would constitute our driver's license or maybe a credit card with our business cards, because we have our username, we have our phone number on it, we have our title, our name. Very easy for somebody to generally possibly spoof our identity. So with that, and with a general trend of we want to have passwords that are convenient to us, that we can remember, what generally happens in terms of cyber attacks is at 81% of those cyber attacks are because of a compromised username and password, because they are very easy to become and create a compromised state. Like I said, usernames are very easy, and then people are generally somewhat lax in having a strong password because they don't want to have to go to a password manager or have a password that they can't remember. Now, this is a fairly old percentage, and I would venture a guess that that this percentage is probably higher than 81% today, with the sophistication of using AI bots and things of that nature to run and to create dictionary attacks and brute force attacks on passwords. Those are probably is a much higher number than it is on this slide. But even so, when we're thinking about cyber attacks, generally those do happen when we have a password breach or a password guess. So let's think about how we've evolved from an identity management solution and how we're doing it. We have the traditional approach that we were using before cloud technologies came into place. There was no single sign-on. Every application had its own identity database. The application designers and developers would put that identity and access into their application, and then they would provide users with the access and put their names in the database, give them their credentials, and they would have access to the application. And that was application by application, so everybody had a different potentially username. It could have been their last name, first initial, last name, all of those things, depending on how that designer and developer created those applications. It was the identity risk was very limited because we had our physical controls in place, and utilizing SSL VPN for remote users, or users were in an office on the local internet or on the local LAN and local area network, and they could connect directly to those applications, and maybe they didn't even have access outside of the building walls. So controls were around the network perimeter and the building to make sure unauthorized people didn't access. As we moved into cloud and utilizing cloud services, both through our personal and business lives, using SaaS-based solutions and more cloud provider-based developed applications, we're now utilizing federated systems for both our cloud and our on-premises systems. We're developing things much deeper. It improves our analytics. We can provide gated access, though we might not be doing that as well as we should. But we are utilizing passwords that now spread a much larger attack surface, and we need to protect those. So we want to move into this optimal area, and this is where ultimately, from this talk, everybody should really kind of gather where we're going, and it's really to hopefully get to a passwordless authentication environment. And it's a little bit challenging still for businesses to get to that. We can get to that on a personal level. I've gone passwordless for my Microsoft account. I've deleted my password out of my Microsoft 365 account and utilize the Authenticator app solely for push approvals and access when I go to log in. So if somebody doesn't have my phone, they're not going to get into my account. It gives a lot deeper behavioral analysis, and we'll talk about that later on in the talk. And ultimately, first and foremost, we should have MFA enforced, which is multi-factor authentication, for those of you that aren't around the identity world. Hopefully in your lives, both personally and business, and from a business perspective, you're utilizing multi-factor authentication, and we'll talk about why that is important later on in this discussion. But let's kind of talk about now a personal story around identity and access management, and how this can really, and what I've just talked about in the last few slides can really create an issue, not just in your business life, but our personal lives, if we don't show the proper due diligence and due care. So just to level set, and I'm going to give you kind of a overview of this particular cautionary tale that personally happened to my family. around identity and identity theft on the internet. So 3 accounts involved here. My Xfinity account, which is Comcast, which is my internet services provider, my Microsoft account, and a Fortnite account. So I believe Fortnite is a world known gaming platform, game that everybody seems to play from Epic Games. And so my son is an avid Fortnite player, or not as much now, but he was a couple years ago when this took place. One day, I was getting emails that his password had been changed on his Xfinity account, and after some investigation, found out that somebody had gotten into his account and changed the username, or the recovery email and recovery phone number. We will talk about what I did and what aspects what I went through to rectify that. But after I had rectified that on the Xfinity account, I started getting that for his Microsoft account as well. Ultimately, because that email address was tied to his Fortnite account, they also were able to get into and steal his identity, change his his screen name, and steal his screen name and all of his skins and weapons and everything he was using that he had brought up, as well as his level score, his gamer score, and all of that was stolen, and somebody had went and changed the username and locked him out of his account. So essentially, if you think about Fortnite, and think about any kind of game that you accumulate and purchase virtual items, he had invested a couple years and probably a few $100s from gift cards and things that he had gotten for birthdays and Christmas and things like that into this Fortnite account. So no different than somebody coming in to your house and stealing your jewelry or your clothing within your home. It was a very high level violation of his personal space, and and one that was very damaging to him when he found out. So we'll talk about here at the end of the presentation, after we've gone through some of these areas of how we protect our identities, on how I was able to regain access and control on all of these accounts. So first and foremost, when we're talking about identity and protecting identities and what we're going to do to protect our identities, we need to think about the principle of zero trust. And zero trust has been in the forefront when we're talking about identity and access management. Excuse me. It has also been very important across all of our cloud ecosystem and cloud infrastructure. It's not just identity and access, it's networks, it's having proper network perimeter control, having proper endpoint protection, proper data protection, all in play. But what the principle of zero trust is that we are going to trust no one, and we are going to require verification along the line of access, and along the line of somebody gaining access to our data, to whether it's our personal information, our health information, our business information. We want to verify access and make sure and enforce principles of least privilege and least needed access. So every user should only have the access that they need for what they need to do for their job tasks and their job duties, and for how long they need it. And we'll should never have elevated privileges unless they need it. And we'll talk about that when we get to privileged identity management. So as we enforce that zero trust, we need to protect and have levels of access, and we really have to balance between providing users with seamless access, making it so it's not an inconvenience to them. If we make accessing certain systems a bit of an inconvenience. Human nature is they're going to find another way, and that's where we get into trouble with things like shadow IT. But that's another talk for another day. We want to make sure that we're unlocking IT efficiencies, having dynamic protection, having machine learning capabilities in the background that can analyze and understand and find anomalous behavior that's taking place on user accounts or in sign-in situations. And we need to facilitate and still allow collaboration between our users. So it's a delicate balance here between our IT putting proper controls in place and protecting our users and our information, while also allowing our users to continue to perform their job functions with ease and collaborate with each other, especially in the world of work from home and being able to collaborate with users across the globe. We still need to provide that access, but we need to provide it sensibly and with protection. And the zero trust model helps us to get to that point and continue this verification. And we'll get in a little bit more into this workflow because within Microsoft and within Microsoft Azure Active Directory, we have the capability to bring this zero trust model and this zero trust workflow into our identity and access administration and management through conditional access policies. But what we're looking at is we've got users that might be on an unprivileged network, and they are accessing accessing or trying to access an on-premises application. Maybe it's a Microsoft 365. Maybe it's another line of business application like Workday or Salesforce, and we want to understand have that user log in. They should be ultimately first and foremost every time they log in using multi-factor authentication. But then when they're accessing certain applications, we might want to verify again their identity and verify they are who they say they are, that somewhere along the lines of their original logging into their laptop or their mobile device, that they may have changed location. Their device state may have changed. It might be a different device that they logged in originally. There might be some level of depending on the user and the user's rights or the sensitivity of that application and the information they're trying to access. We have certain conditions that we need to make sure that are met before we give access, and so we can trigger based on those conditions and the state of the device and the user. We can then provide another action of verification, whether it's enforcing multi-factor authentication again, maybe requiring a password change, or if they are in a location that is seen and known as a potential risk, where there is a lot of threats and bad actors in the area, we might block access to that particular application until they get to a safe network and a privileged network. So that's what really the principle of zero trust is when it comes into identity. And what Microsoft has is, as I said, conditional access policies, and this takes everything that we're talking about here in terms of zero trust and really takes all of those areas. And you can see, a very busy slide with a lot of information around this, but takes those machine learning capabilities that Microsoft has inherent to their platform. It looks at anomalous behavior in terms of the session and the sign-in experience, what that user and what that user's potential status is within our Azure Active Directory environment, and then has a level of controls based on those conditions and where they're logging in, what they're logging in from, and then provides access to that. And we're going to show this in action when I get into the demo here at the end. So what goes? I've I mentioned modern authentication in my title of the talk, and so what are ways to enforce and to create modern authentication, and what are we talking about? First and foremost, we're talking about utilizing some form of multi-factor authentication. This is our first step to modern authentication and securing our identities across cloud providers. Is utilizing it, and you can see here. I mentioned before that 80+% of our cyber attacks take place because of passwords passwords and usernames being guessed, and somebody utilizing those to get into our systems. Multi-factor authentication prevents 99.9% of identity attacks. There's never 100%, unfortunately, because attackers are generally pretty shifty and find ways. So there is a 0.1% there, and generally that 0.1% is really going to fall into more so user error than it is going to fall into multi-factor authentication not necessarily working. Maybe somebody leaves their auth token key somewhere, and somebody gains access to that. When we talk about SMS, the three in the middle here are probably my least favorite means of multi-factor authentication. I prefer push approval or auth codes that are going through our smartphones, because you can't get to the authenticator app without unlocking your smartphone. So hopefully you've got some form of password protection already on your smartphone, and therefore you're protecting that aspect of getting to that even if somebody gets to your desk and you left your smartphone sitting at your desk, they still cannot access that device. If they're using the SMS text push or a voice call or auth token, like I said, somebody could leave their auth token lying around that's putting the codes up, and then you're compromised at that point. And voice call and SMS, it has an inherent imperfection to it, so to speak, where you can answer a voice call without unlocking your phone. So if somebody gains access to both your phone and your device, they're able to they could pretend that they're you and answer that call and push that button to authenticate. Same thing with SMS text. Sometimes that code will be visible in the lock screen. Like things like I've noticed that Apple on the iPhone has gotten a lot better with that, and kind of recognizes when it's an authorization code, and will block the text in the SMS text message until you unlock your phone, but sometimes it does still come through. So that's really those examples there is really where that 0.1% of identity attacks where MFA fails. And MFA is not going to fail if you're doing your proper due diligence on the user end to protect your second factor, really the what you have for the most part. Now, like I said, it's not ultimately fail safe. So what could we do to take this to the next level? We could put in passwordless credentials and use passwordless authentication, and therefore that password then no longer becomes a liability to us. We're utilizing other means to authenticate, and it's generally going to be it's going to be a PIN that's in our that's protected within our BIOS, and then we're utilizing essentially biometrics to some degree to protect our devices. Windows Hello, if you have a Windows 10 device, you might use Windows Hello, where it's utilizing your facial recognition to authenticate you to your device. Now that is considered a multi-factor authentication means, because when you set up Windows Hello, you put a PIN number in, and that PIN then is no longer on the operating system, unlike a password where you type in your password and you're typing it right on the operating system. This is going into the BIOS of the device. So if somebody steals your hard drive, they cannot gain access because that PIN number does not go with that hard drive. It is on the ROM and embedded on the hardware then of that device. Same thing with your smartphone. When you create biometrics on your smartphone, you're putting a PIN in. You're not utilizing that PIN every time you log in. You're using your face recognition, but it's calling that PIN number as that second form of authentication. The Authenticator app is my personal favorite passwordless device and multi-factor device because with passwordless, when I put my email address in on my Microsoft account, it gives me a number on the screen, just a random 2-digit number. I go to my Microsoft Authenticator app and select that number, and I am logged in. Great thing about the Authenticator app, I need to use my facial recognition to unlock my phone. Then I have to use my facial recognition to unlock the app. So I'm really verifying myself multiple times, but very conveniently, because all I'm doing is looking at the screen of my phone, which I would do anyway. So it's a very convenient method of authentication without making it clumsy and an inconvenience to our user environment. FIDO security keys, again, I'm not myself from a personal perspective a proponent of giving another device to somebody that could be lost. Like I said, everybody generally has a smartphone today, or can get one fairly inexpensively. So why not use the smartphone approach? But FIDO 2 keys, which is Fast Identity Online, is what the acronym is for FIDO. We can provide those to our users, and this might be for larger companies that and users, a user environment that does not want to use their personal phones for business use, and the business does not want to provide smartphones and cell phones to everybody. That then they can provide these FIDO keys. The FIDO keys, again, are a USB key with generally a biometric fingerprint read. So there's your two factors there, something you have and something you are. No passwords required. You plug it in. It actually works in tandem with Windows Hello. Using a FIDO key with Windows Hello for Business allows us to authenticate. Now, if you're in an industry and a company that doesn't allow USB plugins on your devices to be plugged in on your company devices, FIDO keys become a problem as well. So that's why some of these techniques are a little bit difficult for some highly regulated, especially like governmental organizations, to utilize those and to put those in play, because they might not allow those USB keys or utilize people to bring their smartphones. Really good question. What happens if I lose that device? So that's where you have the fail safe of having self-service password reset, and you can then put that in play. Generally a lot of times that might be a call to our IT department, but if we have self-service password reset in play, you still can get a code then that'll allow you to access that system and bring and reset and go into your account at that point. So those are ways that we don't get locked out of our account. There are also ways within Azure Active Directory to report that you've lost your device or need to get reset, and a temporary pause in enforcing those multi-factor authentication capabilities. So those are different ways, but you need some level. There are some level fallback, and that's why yes, if you lose, that's why I don't particularly like the having a separate auth device. I think for the most part, users are fairly good about having and securing their own smartphones. So those are all good. That's a really good question. And like I said, why passwordless has been a little bit slower to adoption. So really good question there. Another question that came up, do you support use of biometric type authentication because they don't change in a lifetime? Yeah, I do like that. That's why I said that from a standpoint of using the Microsoft Authenticator, I'm using biometric authentication to access my phone. I'm using, because I'm using the Apple Face ID, as well as I have Face ID on my Authenticator app. So when I open that Authenticator app, I've got to also do facial recognition again. So that is definitely my preferred means for passwordless and even multi-factor authentication types of and using that as my second factor. What if I'm using a password or I'm not using a password? It's definitely biometrics. I use Windows Hello on my Windows devices, so those are definitely needs on that. But there are, you're losing those devices if you have that's, and one of the things that Microsoft is doing, and you may have seen on social media, that they have moved from and are actually bringing together self-service password reset and Azure Active and multi-factor authentication much more tightly in the coming months, which is going to help in some of those means and those aspects of having a fallback and being able to make sure that people don't lose their access. So let me move along here quickly. I see I've been speaking a little bit long here this morning. So when we're talking about that passwordless, and like I said, when we were talking that delicate balance a few slides back, when we going passwordless is a high security, high convenience aspect of identity and access management, because again, when we think about two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication, we had, when that first rolled out, people were like, oh no, I've got to put another code in and all of that. So there is a level of inconvenience because it's an extra step to our authentication, but it is much more secure and highly secure, and due to rather than passwords. If we can move to passwordless, you can see we move to that high security, high convenience level. So risk events and conditional access. Again, I talked a little bit about this with our when I was talking about zero trust and the machine learning capabilities that go in here to understand what levels of risk we have within the identity protection platform really goes into how our devices are protected, finding whether they're leaked credentials, looking for anomalies and different behavior like impossible travel. I'm in Michigan, USA. What happens if I'm in Michigan and then all of a sudden I'm logging in from Sweden 15 minutes later? There's no way that I could travel in that amount of time. So I'm going to possibly get flagged as a risk event and a possible user risk because I am and maybe my credentials have been leaked. So we get those risk levels, and those risk levels then we can set conditional access policies to require that additional level of authentication to access certain applications. And that's what those conditional access policies are. It's when something happens, we're going to do this. And that was what I was talking about when we were talking about zero trust. Conditional access policies enforce those. So the last thing real quick to talk about, and then we'll go into, and I want to show something around conditional access policies and enforcing that zero trust and testing that zero trust as we close things out, is privileged identity management. And I talked about having least privileged access and people having access to only the resources that they need to do their job. And there are users that sometimes need administrative access. What privileged identity management does is it gives just-in-time access to those users that's time-bound, so we decrease our attack surface for our privileged identity users by rather than giving them permanent access and giving them a permanent administrator role, we assign them a role, and then when they need it, they request it, they get access, and they get access for a time-bound amount of time. And we can then review that and make sure they don't change their roles, change departments on a regular basis. We can set up access reviews to make sure that those are still valid roles that those users need. So we aren't getting ourselves into situations where we are losing, where we are increasing our attack surface. So if their credentials get compromised, an attacker is also getting access to sensitive systems. So those are always good to put in play and good to utilize. Ultimately, the administrator and how you plan to do those, we activate, and we can then assign those, activate, approve, and audit. So that's a really good question. Does Microsoft collect our access data to train its ML models, which are used for zero trust? Yes. So in identity, Azure Active Directory identity protection, that is evaluating what our users' general day is, and it's gathering that information of this user is working from home. They're working from this IP address 99% of the time, and when that 1% falls, they're going to say, okay, is that IP address an anonymous IP address? Are we seeing that as a trusted, is that a trusted location that we put in to our systems where it's our headquarters IP range, and it's then identifying, and that's how it finds that anomalous behavior, and it's constantly training that model based on where that user's logging in. Maybe if that user is a road warrior and they're always logging in from different places, maybe we set that user gets set when they sign in from an anonymous IP address to a medium rather than a high level, but it still flags it, and we can then investigate. And that's really what goes into that. That's a really good question. So this is generally the workflow. Once we get into those workflows, really access reviews are very important. So let's really quick. I wanted to show something in the portal here quick around conditional access. That's really a good way for creating and planning our conditional access policies. And you can go and just type conditional, and you can find Azure Active Directory conditional access policies. We create a new policy. If we create a new policy, we look at what what our users are, what apps are part of that policy, and different conditions that are in here. And this is where we can put user risk and sign-in risk, device platforms. This particular device platform is for iOS devices. So, and once we put those into play, generally what you don't want to do is put these on right away, because you might block somebody from having access. So put it on report only. And then what we want to do here is this great feature here in conditional access is the what if feature. So we go to what if, and we can select a user. So if I go in here and I'll just select this user here, and let's say I want to look at what happens if they're on a Mac OS platform, and I do what if. And down at the bottom here, what's going to come up is this particular policy, the Death Star protection policy. I was doing a sci-fi based presentation on conditional access this week. So I created this policy in that demo. You can see what is going to take place. And we've got other policies that will not apply within here as well. So because I knew that was a Mac OS there, I can also go and select Android and do what if for Android. And here, this is invoking my deny access from Android devices. So this is how we can test if our zero trust is working. Generally, best practice, you're not going to put Death Star protection. You're going to say access from a Mac OS device. Make your policy name have a little bit of information in it, so that we can make sure that if you aren't testing it and going through and testing it, we can make sure that somebody coming behind you knows what that policy is supposed to do. And this is denying access, and we can see that the grant control is blocking access. So we can go from there. Running out of time here, so let me wrap things up by kind of just saying, what did I do to protect after my kid's Fortnite account was compromised. I was the administrator for the Xfinity account and the Microsoft account. Thankfully, being that I managed my family, I went into Xfinity, changed the recovery email address and phone number. And Xfinity did the same with Microsoft, changed his passwords, set up multi-factor authentication on both of those accounts, which I was slow to doing for his accounts, but even though I do them on mine, and then Fortnite was a little bit more challenging because he got his stuff stolen. We had to prove that it was his account. So I had to go find a purchase for V-Bucks that we had done or for skins and send that to Fortnite. They gave us our account. I immediately went to a password generator and generated a unguessable password because Fortnite does not utilize multi-factor authentication. But now we have our accounts protected, are utilizing multi-factor authentication on the Xfinity and the Microsoft account, and there has been no problems now, knock on wood, for a couple of years since this happened. So, but this really is, like I said, a cautionary tale about how important it is to protect our identities and make sure that we are first and foremost utilizing multi-factor authentication on our key accounts within our personal and business lives. So that gets me to the end of my presentation. Hopefully everybody learned a little bit about what modern authentication is, user conditional access. I know I went through privileged identity management pretty quick, just looking at the time and being sensitive to everybody's time here on a Saturday. But feel free to reach out to me with any other questions after this, and I know we'll be going over to a Zoom call if there's any questions for the last 15 minutes. And again, feel free to reach out to me on the social media links provided here. Happy to interact and answer any of them as you are trying to formulate and devise a plan for your identity and access system. Another question coming in: can privileged identity management also help us control user identities of a partner tenant or B2B user? Yes, it can. That's a great question. If we have a federated group using B2B, or we have a guest user, those users that are accessing our tenant, we can also assign PIM roles to them as well. So yes, very good question. So it's anybody that's in our environment.
Yes. Thank you so much, Dwayne, for the great. You're very polite with the time. like you're the first speaker that kind of compress the session for the sake of time. You took it seriously.
I always try to make sure that we stay on. Like I said, I've done this talk multiple times, and there's places where I get a little bit more fired up on things in this particular talk.
Yes.
Very, very passionate about identity and access and protecting identities, especially when you've been violated yourself. That's that was really where the talk was inspired. This particular talk was inspired was when that happened. I'm like, wow, I should do a talk about this.
Yeah, and it's I like it that you did share about your personal story, because the stories is what motivates us to do the things that we do. And I like the session because I myself uses these security tools that you mentioned, Authenticator, not just to protect my own identity also, but it's good to learn about these things. And I actually have a question, if it's okay. I wrote that in my paper. That's why I was writing down. I thought I would raise it up instead of Vika. Maybe others can relate to my question. So for my personal safety, how would I verify or make sure that that I know I'm safe, like my identity online is safe. Like how do you I usually check that? I use those stuff already, authenticator and also the pop-up on my phone. But I really like the question of Ashish about losing. What if I lose my phone because I have everything on my phone, including the work identity I have? What if I lose my phone? But how do I make sure that I regularly check and verify on that?
Yeah, there is a MVP that has developed an app that you can actually, a website that you can actually put your email address in. I'm trying to find out. I was actually
Yeah.
just talking
Is it Have
yesterday.
I Been Pound? Is that
Huh?
one? Have
Yeah, I
I
think that,
been? Yeah, okay, that
That's
one.
exactly it. Yep.
All right, all right. Yes. Okay. Yeah, that one. So I think you can sign up for it and then you get a notice if your email address has been compromised. Let me
Yeah, here.
just
Yep, that's exactly it. Here, I'll put
Yes,
it
I
in
can
the.
paste it here in the comments.
Yeah, sure.
Yep, there it is. Yep, that's the one. Yeah, that's a really good one because it'll show if your identity has shown up like on suspect sites and things like that. So those are some things, that's probably the quickest way to find if your identity's possibly been compromised. So
Yes, that's
definitely.
right. Yeah, we got feedback and great feedback. As she said that we should go passwordless. Stefan also said thanks for the great presentation. And one more question from Asar. This one.
Have you ever seen more than two-factor authentication? No, I mean, no, not really. I mean, like I said, I actually, when you think about what I've mentioned in terms of my passwordless and going through my multi-factor authentication, I'm authenticating probably about 4 times with my Face ID when I get a push notification because I'm putting my email address in. It's giving me that 2-digit code. I've got to unlock my phone with my face recognition, and I got to unlock that app with my face recognition. So and then I've got to select that number that's sent to me. So I'm really doing it. I'm really authenticating 3 times, but I'm still using really only 2 factors of authentication when you think about it. So generally, you're not seeing all 3 being used per se. But they might be being used with on different platforms with different things. So if I'm using in my business, I'm using multi-factor authentication. I put my password in. I've got to get a code. I've got to unlock my phone with my code. So I'm using biometrics. I'm using a code, and I'm using I'm using something something I have, and something I know. But it's authenticating to multiple platforms in that aspect. So it's still really 2-factor authentication to get into my Microsoft account.
Yes. We have a comment from Ashish here. It looks like he's been like doing like the hands-on already, checking if it's safe. Yes. 2 data breaches. How do you just is it like what do you think, Dwayne? Like when you sign up for I Been Pound, do you just like follow the instructions to reset your password when you've been pound or breached?
You got to figure out what might that have been. I've looked, and it's been like something that's been really old, and probably might have been before I put multi-factor authentication in place. Just note, if it says that you've been pound and you have and you've put multi-factor authentication in place, I think it gives if I remember right, it gives a date to that. Just understand what might have been taking place around that time, and if you've put any additional security parameters in since then. If not, and then you need to kind of investigate okay, what has gone on, and maybe it's somebody just just utilize your email address to sign up for something, and you need to just find that and get off. I had a problem when I initially got onto Twitter. My email address was already being used for some reason on Twitter, so I had to find a way into into that Twitter account and the only thing I could do was just shut that account down and deauthorize that email address ultimately, so that nobody was just using my identity online, and rather than necessarily being able to use it. I just had to use a different email address to get into Twitter.
Yes, that's good. Yeah. Do you have something, Håkan?
Yeah, I also have a question because now we've been talking about how can you actually ensure that you are the right person to access a specific resource, like an email address, for example. But what if you have sort of maybe the opposite problem here, that you have one email address, but you want to have several people accessing that email address without sharing, the password? How could you make that happen?
See, that's doing that kind of violates a little bit of it kind of breaks the whole system down in a way of making auditable access and verifying identities. So you really shouldn't do that per se. I know with another user group that I'm involved in, we use StreamYard to moderate. And so if you're using you're logging into a StreamYard account, it sends you a code that expires after a certain amount of time. The organizer that I work with actually wrote I think he used I don't know if he used an Azure function or he used a logic app, but what he does is you use the generic the user group email address, and since not everybody has access to that email address, we don't want to expose that password. That logic app grabs that code and pushes it into a Slack channel that only the moderators have access to. So that's a really nice way that we've utilized sharing access to a single platform with a single email address, and kind of protecting it as well, because it's a locked Slack channel that only those moderators have access to. So since it's not really sensitive information anybody's gaining access to, that does its job. But I wouldn't recommend creating accounts, and that's really where I think you would create maybe a group account or something like that you could utilize, that the users could use their own username and password though to access that group account.
Yes.
In that aspect, that way you still have auditability and you have accountability, and that's really really what it comes down to is we can't investigate threats if 10 people are utilizing the same username and password. If something gets compromised, we don't know where that came from or who might have done that, whether it's an insider threat or it's an external threat. That really gets into a potential issue there.
Yes, that's right. I have a question. I know that we're like 2 minutes before the end of time, but this is like interesting topic for me because it's like not just in the cloud, but also protecting our own identity. But I'm a developer, and of course, I do focus on coding and building systems. But as a developer, how would I improve and learn my knowledge as to build security system and build a system that protects the identity of my users? How would I get started? Yeah.
And I did a talk with a developer friend of mine a couple of days ago. And he had a very similar question that developers tend to struggle around the identity and access. One of the things that you can do, and what to take advantage of what Microsoft has in place, is building in and registering your apps when you develop it. Register your app in Azure Active Directory. If you register that app, go to my Azure Active Directory here. Oh, we're not sharing my screen. So if you go to Azure Active Directory and go to app registrations, here you can actually register your app. If you're developing on in Microsoft App Services, you can register that application. If it's on-premises application, you can do the same and utilize App Proxy. And then you can tie that application and the Azure Active Directory authentication all of those capabilities and that auditability and that single sign-on all into the Azure environment.
Okay. Yes.
And you can tie those into conditional access policy. So if you're developing an app that needs a high level of security, you can go in, and when you create your policy and you go to your cloud apps, you notice I had a demo app that was in here that's on an app service. That demo app falls into here just like any cloud app that you register, like Office 365.
Yes. We have a comment from Ashish here. Maybe Dwayne has an input in that.
Yeah, you have. Yes, you also have. You can generate secrets. You can use Key Vault as well from that aspect. Yep.
Yes, that's right. All right. Time is. Yeah. We are on right at time. But before we end our session, maybe I know, Dwayne, that you have books. You're writing a book, and this is related to identity. Maybe you would like to share about your book, maybe to those who are interested to learn more about it.
Yeah. So yeah, I got the book right here. Identity and
share
access.
the link. Yeah.
Identity and access management administration guide. Whether you are or are not studying for the SC300 exam, it's a great pickup because it goes through everything, a good portion of what I talked about today in a deep depth, as well as exercises in every chapter that you can step through within the Azure Active Directory environment to get familiarized with a lot of the things that I talked about today and beyond that. One of the things that we did that I did with this book and what we did when I was involved in the refresh of the job task analysis and the objective domains back a few months ago was put a lot more around app registrations and third party and on-premises application integration into Azure Active Directory. So there's 2 or 3 chapters specifically noted for that. It was because that was an area that all of us coming into that discussion for refreshing the objective domains and the tasks of becoming an identity and access administrator that we all felt was lacking in the original creation of this exam. Being that this exam is still rather new, so it's evolving, but we put a lot more into it. And since I had finished the book and had put a little bit expansion on that, we actually were able to get that into the refresh of the domain.
This is great. Yes, I myself read the book, so I'm gonna do it into a hands-on in what I do. Yes. All right. Yes. I think we should be. We're up for time. And before we end our session, maybe we can share our QR code for the Fika.
Yes. So let me put on a banner here. So here you can either use the QR code, or you can use this address that I will also post in the comment in a moment here. Like this. So we'll have a quick gathering on Zoom, and you will be able to ask more questions here to Dwayne. With that said,
yes.
Yes.
With that said, go ahead. Okay, sorry.
Yes, so I was thinking with that said, we would just like to thank Dwayne so very much. It's been a real pleasure to have you here, and we hope that we'll be able to have you back again in a future event.
Yes,
Sounds good.
great session.
Of course.
Yeah.
Anytime.
Yes. And thank you, everyone, for tuning today and for your time. Feel free to join us if you have extra 15 minutes on Zoom. And I hope that you have a great weekend. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.